This programme was produced at and first aired on MPR, Manawatu People's Radio, with support from New Zealand On Air. Ka pai Irarangi Tamotu, MPR.
Kia ora and welcome to Reserved Recommendations, a show about problematic faves, great trash, difficult art, and our complex relationship with art and entertainment. My name's Hugh, I'm the host, and I'd like to put in a very mild content warning for this show as a whole. Sometimes our recommendations on this show are reserved just because the thing that we're discussing is in some way not good. But sometimes there are aspects to the art or artist that may be confronting for some people. Read the episode descriptions for more information, and do be aware of your listening environment. Hi folks, just before we start the show, I've got a couple of quick things to say for you. Firstly, I do apologise for the audio quality in this episode. I was talking to Kosmic over a slightly ropey Discord connection. This is just the sort of thing that you have to deal with when you have international guests and everyone is in lockdown. However, there is also a point in the conversation where I get a phone call because, like a noob, I forgot to put my phone on silent or airplane mode. I do immediately hang the phone up, but you will probably hear it ring, and I just have to apologise to you all for that. It is entirely suboptimal, and that bit is my fault. Secondly, I just want to reiterate a content warning for this episode in particular. I know that you have just listened to me give a general one for the entire show, but this episode we're talking about the long-running manga and anime and movie and various other things series Berserk, and it is impossible to have a reserved recommendations type conversation about that work in particular without some discussion of rape and sexual assault. Now, we don't get super detailed and graphic about it, but we do talk about it. If that's not a thing that you want to listen to, maybe give this episode a miss. Alternatively, if you are fine with it, I'd just like to reiterate my warning in the intro about making sure that you are aware of your listening environment for this episode in particular. Now that that's out of the way, let's get on with the show. This week on Reserved Recommendations, we have the second international guest basically ever, and I'm going to kind of count you as the first proper international guest because the first one was my brother, and so while he's living in Glasgow, he is actually from New Zealand, so I'm sort of counting him as half local.
Oh, I see.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce you all to Kosmic. Hello, how's it going?
Hi, I'm so happy to be.
Fantastic. Well, so I guess a quick intro to who you are before we get to what we're going to be talking about. So you make a couple of comics. That's primarily how I know you. One called Feast for a King and another called Nasty Red Dogs. And I was put onto both of those by a woman called Shannon Strucci who made a video reviewing Feast for a King on YouTube.
Yes, that was a fantastic video.
Well, it's kind of the spiritual inspiration for this series, really, because I thought that the way that she gave a reserved recommendation for Feast for a King, saying, here are all of the amazing things about it, but also if you have trouble with X, Y, and Z thing, which includes cannibalism, just to get it out there, then maybe this series is something that you should tread cautiously with. And I thought that was a fascinating conversation to try and have.
It was the perfect way to describe my stories because, even for me, it's difficult to promote myself sometimes because the content that I do is so difficult, and it's like, it puts me in an awkward position, so I just was so thankful to have a video articulate things in a way that's much better than I could have, so, and I really appreciate that video my audience is so much bigger now because of it. Incredible.
Oh no, that's what good criticism will do for you, really, and definitely a sideways plug to Shannon for being an excellent critic. But the thing that we wanted to talk about today kind of came out of having become a fan of the comic, I followed you on Twitter and I saw you say something in passing about basically what a heartbreaker the manga series Berserk is. And that's a conversation I've been wanting to have with someone who knows Berserk for a heck of a long time, because holy crap, Berserk.
Yes.
So that brings us to our topic for the day, which is Berserk, the just ridiculously long-running manga series by Kentaro Miura. I guess by way of introduction for people who have no idea what the hell we're talking about, what's the kind of like the nutshell or the elevator pitch for Berserk, insofar as you can do that with something that's this ridiculously dense and long?
I mean, I guess the most simple way I could describe it is that it's sort of like the anime Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, but also the like dark. Gosh, that's like really hard to actually explain it, but it's sort of like it starts off as like the medieval fantasy trope, but then it like goes really deep with the horror of these fantasy things, and
I mean, I get
it sort of.
I guess that is kind of the best kind of nutshell description is that it's a Japanese interpretation of the European style of fantasy, a la Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings and such, but it's also really horrific. There's a strong horror thing going on, and way more than Game of Thrones or even Lord of the Rings, really. It's like,
oh, definitely,
it's like a portrait of this one guy and the life that he's lived and the things that have made him the way that he is.
It's like it almost especially if you're going into it with the original anime from 1997, it sets up the premise of that kind of story of the fantasy medieval kind of tropes that you're used to, but then it changes, and then you're sort of like caught off guard by the direction that it ends up taking, and then obviously if you're going into it from the manga, you kind of have that glimpse before they go to the flashback of the Golden Age, but that's anyway, it's just it does dive deeper into the sort of like where all this fantasy comes from, except it's like horrible. The horribleness of
it's way
magic.
Grimmer and darker than anything that those authors have done, but it reminds me a bit in that sense of people like are you familiar with Robin Hobb?
Oh, no, I'm not actually.
Okay, so she's a fantasy author. She wrote a series called the Farseer books, which are about a kid who's raised to be the king's assassin. And the thing about it that reminds me of Berserk is that it's really it's set in this fantasy world with magic and dragons and all of that nonsense, but it's got way more of, I guess, what you call like a social history approach. Like it's way more interested in what it's like to be a person who lives in the world than it is in like the grand adventure to restore the king to his rightful power or whatever. That
sounds awesome, and definitely a way to explain it's about the perspective of the people actually having to live in a world where there's like magical monsters and things to fight, and it's not really, that wouldn't be fun to actually deal with. So Berserk likes to really amp up how everything's out to kill you. It's not it's just sort of like, we have to deal with all this and it sucks.
So, I have like a whole bunch of angles that I want to approach this from, and feel free to interrupt or force a digression in a particular direction if you want.
Sure.
But I guess one of the things that fascinates me about it as a series is the way that it handles the kind of evil side of the occult, specifically the way that it handles demons. So demons are a big part of Berserk. The main kind of central through line is the result of the actions of demons, but demons are all people who've made a really specific decision, and maybe you can talk a little bit about how that works, because I think it's super interesting.
It's the best part, honestly. Like, I with I have a lot of mixed feelings about Berserk, as I've been following it since I was 17. And I am 29 now, so it's been, you go through a lot of ups and downs with your feelings on the series, and it was definitely one of my biggest influences, especially when I was developing as a storyteller, and it was definitely the darkest work I ever read at the time. Definitely read other dark things since then, but it was such a shock to me because, I was like, I did not expect so many things to go the way they did, but I love the apostles, and I love this, like, having the agents, like, they choose this they to become this horrible thing, and I really find that a fascinating insight on character and, like, desperation and those kinds of decisions.
And it's
seeing how they'd grow from it is just like a really interesting storytelling thing that you can just use again and again, and it doesn't really get old, because it's just like, how could you do this kind of stuff is. And I just love the Behilit. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's been so long, I don't actually remember how to pronounce a lot of things, but the little the necklaces are. I love those things so much. I used to wear one of those for years. It was really fun.
Yeah, it's done in a really sneaky way as well, because the first... if people aren't familiar with Berserk, the kind of... the structure of the story is you start with the main character, whose name is Guts, and you start kind of in the middle of his life while he's in kind of his iconic final form with most of his final equipment. And he's going around the fantasy world hunting down demons and killing them. And it then gets explained why he's doing what he's doing and what everything means and where it comes from over the course of what's called the Golden Age arc, which is basically a flashback back to his childhood that then takes you all the way back to where you started in the first issue of the comic. And demons are initially introduced kind of as a monster of the week. Like, they're just this kind of big monster that only Guts is tough enough to fight. And it takes a while for you to get to the point where it explains what's going on. Which is, as you say, there are these necklaces called Behilit or Behilit or something. Yeah.
I've heard so many different ways that my own mind interpretation of how to pronounce things is often so incorrect, and then, like, I was a shut-in nerd for so long that, like, don't actually know how other people pronounce things. So.
No, I've mostly read I've watched the 90s anime, but I haven't watched any of the other movies or anime, and so aside from that, I've just been reading the manga, so I just see the word written down over and over again without anyone actually, saying it. Anyway, these things are out in the world, and if one comes into your possession, you get the choice at some point in your life to sacrifice the people that you hold most dear, and in return you get unimaginable power, and that's where demons come from. And from once that discovery's made, every time you get a new demon, you eventually find out who they were and what caused them to make that choice. And it's almost always unbelievably tragic.
Yeah, it's like they sacrificed their tie to humanity, so whoever or whatever it is that they cared more about than anything else, and they willingly decided to sacrifice that to become this other entity because they severed that tie with, I guess, their mortal life. And, you know, just outside of Berserk, that in itself, I think, is just a really, you know, a fascinating thing to contemplate about, like, it puts you in your own perspective of, like, what would push you, or would you crave power or control or whatever agency in the evil world that you would do something like that. And I just think that, you know, most characters in Berserk are so evil that they often make, you know, it's like no wonder he's gonna be evil. But like I think that's really like just a fascinating thing to contemplate just outside of it. And it definitely pushed the brutalness of that definitely pushed my writing to think about what would be that last tie for my characters or anything I work on to, you know, change them as a person to go beyond the brink into next entity or whatever. And, you know, that's good. It's good things to dig about, like with your characters or when you're writing, like, I don't know, to try to think about what they truly care about above all else, and, you know, what the lengths that they were willing to do to get rid of it.
Yeah, because I mean, pure evil is not a very engaging character trait, and you say that some of these characters are very close to pure evil, but they're always driven by something quite human. That, you know, it might be something quite repulsive and human, like, you know, incredible pride or incredible greed or incredible. I was going to use the word lust, but I mean, in the sense of not caring about how anybody else deals with your carnal desires type lust. But those are all quite human flaws that you've probably met someone who's not quite as horrible as that guy, but could be that guy if they were like left.
I have actually yes, I have actually met some really bad people. So it's like maybe not that horrible, but pretty damn close to the cartoonish evil. And I think that what's so interesting about the illusion in Berserk is like all these people that you see that are like these horrible monsters. It's sort of, there's that illusion that they could have, you know, they were human at one point. You know, it's just sort of what brought them there. So it's like, I think that once you know, he establishes this in the story as the path that they take, and then it sort of like puts in a little bit of humanity into all the characters where you're wondering, even if he didn't write it or not, like specifically for the characters, they're sort of like you interpret that they have gone through different kinds of journeys to bring them to this point, and, you know, they might have had a time in their life where they were just as vulnerable and desperate and lonely and all these other sorts of things. And
you sort of get a hint of how someone could pull themselves out of that in the character of, and again, we're dealing with names that I've only seen written down, but Farnese. So she's a holy knight who Guts encounters for reasons that we might go into. But as I say, this is a really long-running, dense and complicated series.
It is.
But she's someone who, when she was a child, witnessed all of these essentially witch burnings. And it's become bound up in her psyche to the point where it's damaging her mind and it's damaging her sexuality, and it's, you know, it's really messing her up. And you can see that she's kind of a prime candidate to take a Behelit and go the demon path, but instead she ends up running away from her role as a holy knight and following Guts, and eventually I think she learns to become a sorceress. And she kind of heals through doing that and through looking after someone else. And so he sort of presents that there's a path that people could go down instead of taking that as well.
I know, and I have a lot of complicated feelings about Farnese specifically because I am on the side of being so disappointed that she had this development where she how explicit can we talk about spoilers? I guess we are.
Oh, look, so
talking about.
Yeah, I guess we should have laid this out at the start, but my point of view is that this is still an ongoing comic series, but it's a comic series that started publication in 1989. So even if I highly respected spoilers, which I don't really, I kind of feel like Berserk is fair game because you know, even knowing what's coming doesn't really spoil stuff so much for me.
I think that if I were to talk about a lot of the topics that I personally would love to discuss with Berserk, most of them involve spoilers because
let's say spoil the heck out of it. It's a comic series that started in 1989. Yeah. You know, the statute of limitations has run out.
Yes. Okay. So that definitely helps me free up some of the things. So when I first read Berserk, I was 17, and I believe that it was either Farnese had already been introduced or it was pretty early in her introduction or something, because I binge read it, and this was like 2007, so it was still obviously very far into the story when I came in, and I was just so fast her brutality, and I was hoping to see her get some sort of like interesting and complicated kind of character arc that Griffith went through, and I just was like really, at the time I was so excited to a female character be so like I don't know, I guess you know, scenes with her were explicit, she was, you know, villainous, but like there seemed to be a pathos inside, like a reason why she was like this way, and I was just like hoping that it was going to, I guess, dig into things, and then like all that ended up happening with her, from my perspective, is that she just ended up becoming like the perfect little like lady maid to take care of Casca and like loves Guts, and it's just like I'm just like not. I don't like really care about anything that happens to her at this point, because like I was more interested in her being like, I don't know, something to have conflict with, and she's just so submissive to everything. And a lot, I have a lot of feelings of involving like a lot of the characters that Guts has with his little troupe, and the sort of tone change, I guess. And I understand it like narratively, and like I understand that this is you know, Guts finding a newfound family, I guess, and like recovering after everything that happened with the eclipse. But like I think combined with how long it's just dragged out, and just like the way, like when you're an artist, you're creating something, of course you're going to change so much. I mean, he's been making this for 30 years. I personally have been working on Feast for a King for 5, and I've seen myself, you know, change in ways that like you can't keep yourself as the same artist even if you desperately want to. And it's just like, it just feels a little weird, almost like, I don't know, it's just sort of like they're sort of just acting out the motions a lot of the times to me in a lot of the recent arcs. And yeah, the characters just aren't as like compelling to me, because I feel like they have to like hit certain development points, and then they sort of coast from there on out. And yeah, and the most recent stuff is Casca's I guess her memory revival thing. She's been healed, and she got a pretty fairy dress, and and I rolled my eyes out of my head when they like went inside her mind or something to fix her, and like they found her and she was like a broken doll, and I was just like, really, dude, like this is so like it comes across as like, okay, if like a teenager wrote something where like the female character was like a broken doll kind of thing, I could see that being like sort of like a sincere awkward, interpretation of like a broken psyche from like abuse and, coming in contact with like a literal demon god and, being broken by him. But like in this context, it just felt like almost so on the nose, and it just, anyway, I'm kind of rambling about several different points.
I mean, I think there's a central core there that's really worth talking about, which is that Kentaro Miura is really good at man pain, but really bad at woman pain. Like,
yes.
I think Casca's a perfect example, because she's introduced in the Golden Age arc, and she's this fierce, pragmatic, legitimately dangerous fighter in a mercenary band. Mm-hmm. There's this interesting love triangle set up between her and Guts and the leader of the band, who's Griffith, who you mentioned. At the end of the Golden Age arc, the eclipse that you refer... so her and Guts start a relationship at some point quite close to the end of that. That's not the best, but it's also not the worst. But during the events of the eclipse, she gets raped by Griffith, which I actually meant to go back and look at the scanlation that I was reading just so I could count how many pages that goes for, because it's really long.
It's a lot.
It's really long, and it's really upsetting, both I think deliberately, but also I think there's a thing particularly in the Golden Age arc where sexual assault of men is tragic and horrifying, but sexual assault of women is kind of hot, according to the comic.
It's there's a long heated debate on if Casca enjoyed that experience or not. It goes on. People argue and they will go on, and I've seen many that like, oh, it'd be messy, because then it's like an added level of how horrible it is. And what's interesting, I personally think that the eclipse was so impactful on me as a storyteller that I still think it's one of the most like profound experiences that I went through. I think about it a lot. It's very inspiring. But I watched the anime version of it, and I feel like in that version of it, it definitely treats, it definitely sexualizes, turns it into a sexy thing, but it's definitely a little gratuitous. And then I remember when I read it the first time, it didn't, like, I thought that a lot of the lead up to it, like the other parts of the eclipse, are so like gorgeously drawn and horrifying, but definitely that part kind of took me out of it a little bit, because there was just so many shots of like he's just going to town. It's like, oh yep, this is okay. How many pages do we need of this? It's at this point it's like it definitely hentai and not like this character that we deeply love, and like it didn't even feel like this is a horrible thing. That it definitely took you back for interpreting the experience as something that is supposed to be like the most horrible thing to ever happen. Instead, it's like, is he wanting us to feel like this is the sexiest, horriblest thing? Like, it's just and then he definitely puts that in, like, what's gonna happen in this situation? Well, the horse is gonna be the the horse thing. Anything. It's just like time to pounce on, okay, I guess this is happening again. Like, it's just, that's just like the way he goes with everything, every scenario.
And I noticed, because I actually reread the whole thing a few months ago. Just because I got to the end of what was available, and I thought I'll reread it with like less delays for waiting for new chapters to show up, and
right.
Because I remembered feeling like some stuff took a really long time, but I wasn't sure if that was because I was waiting for new bits to come out.
Right. Exactly.
So rereading it was less draggy than I remembered, but I also noticed that as soon as Guts and Casca become a thing, there are suddenly a whole bunch of encounters where demons sexually menace Casca and like her boobs come out.
Yeah.
And, like that happens actually quite a lot leading up to the eclipse as well.
Yeah, I remember the I forget what his name is. He's got like, he wasn't Zod, he was like the other guy that was like, let me get that.
I can't remember his name. Is it Wild? He turns into like an enormous thing with like...
I think it was Wild. Yeah, he was like yes, it is Wild. He had like a mouth and he was like a gorilla thing. Like,
yeah, that's the one.
Ripped off. Yeah, I remember that. I remember the scanlation that I read when I experienced that, and there was a very funny thing that Guts said that was obviously not what the original one was, but like it was just a funny moment of awkward scanlation. Something he says to Wild before I think.
Oh, is that the line about like don't pop a boner on my head or something like that?
Yes, he was like, don't be popping a boner on my head. I just remember as a teenager being in hysterics over this like horrific scene, but like he said that line and I was just like, what? Yeah, there's so many moments like that. But yes, it was not something that was just after the eclipse. It was definitely very rampant before that. And I just, I wonder, I guess when you first read Berserk, you think that Moria has like a little more capacity for empathy for his female characters, and then like, you wonder if that was like, if he didn't have that much, or like where it went, or like how it slid to the degree that it does now, or it's almost like, I don't know, like you said, he does a great job at articulating his male characters experiences with trauma, but then his female character is just sort of like, he doesn't tap it, like it's almost like the illusion like he's gonna tap into them deeper, but then he doesn't, and then just objectifies them. And
it's not like he doesn't write really good motivating stories for his female characters as well, though, because like Casca gets this whole thing about where she's from some little village in the middle of nowhere, and she gets like sold to a nobleman who wants to rape her because her parents have no other option basically to try and look after her, and then she gets rescued by Griffith, and that's why she's so devoted to him, and there's this whole thing there, and that's that's powerful, and the encounter with Griffith really sets the tone for the way that she defines her own character throughout the Golden Age arc. Farnese gets that whole thing about being raised around the witch burnings and that kind of permeating everything that she does. And then you find out more about her relationship with her family, and that's even kind of good, juicy stuff. But as you say, Farnese ends up as a nursemaid to Casca. Casca ends up as a kind of comic relief goon.
She doesn't... I just consider her like a sack of potatoes that they have to like haul around that makes noises and stuff. Like, they're like non-characters to me. I understand that they're just like physically meant to be drawn there, but like I don't feel like he cares about... Oh God, and this just is randomly thinking about Charlotte, the princess, and her like visual development, like she's practically de-aged, or like now she looks like a weird 10-year-old. Like it's just, she's supposed to be like the princess and Griffith's betrothed to his new kingdom, and like her drawings lately have just been like really odd, and she's always been kind of she's not like a character that I held high hopes for, but with Farnese I definitely had more high hopes for because I was so intrigued by the scene where she's like masturbating, pleasuring herself to the thought of the burning people, and I was just so shocked reading that, and I was just like, wow, that's cool to like depict, like, I don't know, it, this was clearly, a female character. She's got a twist and what she thinks is desirable or whatever, but it's just like, that was exciting to me that he was going to show that, like, of her own, like, her own I guess in her own agency, sort of like her twisted mind, and I was like, yeah, I want to see her be a horrible person too.
And it's like female sexuality that's like dark and twisted and evil, but it's not connected to a dude, which is kind of interesting.
Yes, yes,
particularly
that was so good. That was genuinely all about that.
Now, we are probably at time for our halfway break, so we will be back with more conversation with Kosmic about Berserk, because holy crap, is there a lot of Berserk to talk about.
There's so much.
So we will be back right after this.
If you're a fan of NPR, listening to our podcasts and live stream has never been easier. Just search for accessmedia.nz on the App Store or Google Play and download the app with the kiwi fruit logo. Once you've got it, pick Manawatu People's Radio from the list of stations and go find your new favourite show. Support this show and others like it by giving a donation. For more information, go to www.mpr.nz/donate.
And we're back. You're listening to Reserved Recommendations, and this week we are talking to Kosmic, the author and illustrator of the comics Feast for a King and Nasty Red Dogs, both of which you can find on the internet for free, though do be warned they are intensely not safe for work. And today we're talking about another intensely not safe for work comic, the long-running series Berserk by Kentaro Miura. Before the break, we were talking about the problems that Miura kind of has with female characters. I don't know if we want to keep going with that or if we want to head in another direction, but holy crap, there's a lot of them.
There's so much that I feel that topic has developed my development with, how my work is explicit. I often depict things with characters that are like twisted, and like their morals are all twisted up, and what I saw in Berserk and what I was hoping to see, like the intrigue that I saw there with having a character like Farnese be like that, and like what I was hoping would happen with her, definitely influenced how I wrote female characters, because I wanted to do what Berserk ended up not doing with that. So it's really interesting because I have often had people be confused by how, I guess, graphic and horrible some of my female characters are, and like how it's just sort of like, yeah, I know, I want them like to be just as evil as you see. I don't know, like they don't have to just become, good, and like they can just like be as monsterly as any other male character often gets given, and that's definitely like a weird road to navigate, and like why you wanted like do that with your characters. But there's a lot I could say about that, but I also would love to talk sometime about how I feel a lot more, I guess, empathy for Maria, like doing the same comic for 30 years than I used to. Like
I think
go
that's
through a breakup period.
Yeah, I think that's a really good conversation to have, and maybe we'll get to that in a second, actually, because I think that might be a nice direction to head in towards the end of the podcast. I think a thing I just wanted to talk to you about briefly before that, though, is you mentioned that the tone in Berserk can be quite weird, as we were talking about the scene with Casca and Wild, this is a main female character who's being threatened with sexual violation by a horrible monster, and then the hero who's trying to rescue her pulls out this weird line about "Don't pop a boner on my head," and I guess what I wanted to talk about was partly I wanted to say that's one of my things with Berserk is that it will show you this terrifying monstrosities or really graphic fight scenes, because one of the things we haven't mentioned is that the central defining feature of the way that Guts, the main character, fights is that his sword is just preposterously huge, and so it completely demolishes people when
sword ever.
Yeah. And so it blows people up when he cuts them with it, basically, because it's so stupidly huge. But it'll have a little fairy in the corner of the panel doing dumb puns at the same time. And it's so weird. And I guess the thing I wanted to do in passing was compliment you in particular, because you've managed, I think, in particularly in Feast for a King, to ride that line. The stuff where Crimson and what's the woman with the jaws on the top of her head? Is it Dylan? Sorry, I'm the worst with names.
No, it's totally fine.
There's an extended bit where they're having sex, and the tone shifts from sexy to horrific to comedic, back and forth between pages and panels. But it always, when you're doing it, it feels more like I've heard it applied to Edgar Wright's movies, where when he's being comedic, he's 100% comedic, and if he decides to switch the tone to horror, he's going to be 100% horror until he's done with that. And so the tone always feels natural, even though it's sometimes shifting between pages or panels.
That's very high praise, and thank you so much. And that scene that is well, actually, I don't know if I can say what it's famous. That was actually the first sex scene I ever drew, depicted all the way, to go with it, and it was also mostly improvised. I originally was not planning to have Feast for a King that graphic, but I just, it felt like what the direction that it was going to take, and it definitely changed the course of the story forever from that point on. And so to hear that I managed to somehow weave together all those different tonal shifts in a way that felt natural is a miracle, because so much of Feast for a King was, I was just delirious and just drawing all day, and then I'd pass out, and then I'd wake up, and then I'd draw more pages. There wasn't a whole lot of planning and forethought. It was just sort of just going with the wind. So, but in a way, I think maybe that's what led to it feeling a little bit more natural, because I was considering it and not washing it over with a lot of second doubt or second thoughts, and that can sometimes change the tone a lot.
Your style is also very very mutable, so which is not. I mean, Kentaro Miura does that a bit. He does some very expressive, splashy ink stuff when people freak out. But you were shifting from really detailed drawings to really scratchy caricature stuff, and that helped a lot. I thought with carrying the tone shift there, because it when people were just shrieking and being goofy, they were also drawn in this kind of childish, over the top way, and that carried a lot of that. And Miura will do that with the character who's being goofy, but it'll still be in a panel that you're supposed to take 100% seriously, and it's very strange.
Right. It's I think because Feast for a King consistently will shift back and forth between like goofiness and like like it's consistent throughout the whole story, but then Berserk is so hyper detailed, and then it wants this the tone of the seriousness, like it's so like absolute in its darkness, and then it will have Puck flying in and being like goofy looking, and it's just sort of like, what is this, like, how can these two things exist in the same pages? Like, Puck is such a... I actually completely forgot he existed until you just brought him up, because that's how much I disregard his existence.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you could take Puck more or less out of the series and not lose a lot. And I think most people's favorite bit of Berserk, if you were to say, like, cut everything but one arc, most people would probably choose to keep the Golden Age, I'm guessing. And the Golden Age,
I think that
has no Puck.
There's no Puck, and that's clearly the key, is that you just take Puck out and then everything's good, and then when Puck comes back, that no. I've seen people say that Puck is there to like keep Maria sane through like, having to draw all this stuff and how grim and sad, and he's like the light of hope or whatever, but like, I don't know. I mean, I don't like, when I'm reading it, I don't like look for Puck and be like, oh, I feel better now that he's looks like an onion.
Puck reminds me a bit of like Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, where Jonan Vasquez would like write a whole bunch of stuff really tiny in the margins, which would be dumb jokes about whatever was going on in the main panel. But I feel like because of the tone of Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, which I don't think is flawless by any stretch of the imagination, but it was always supposed to be like wacky at the same time as dark.
Right.
It fits
it's
better.
It's almost like Berserk. Oh, go ahead. Oh, I was going to say that it's almost like there's two Berserks, and they're just like there sometimes. And they, like, there's times where it has its focus on, like, one kind of version of it, and then I feel like it's slowly, it's sort of flipping into a different kind of Berserk, but then, like, it feels a little, and there's something that I feel gets a little more hollow, and like, I don't know if it's just because so many of the characters are kind of like locked in their roles that they can't like explore them the same way. Maybe he's trying to wrap it up, or there's this I'm kind of going off a point here, but it sometimes feels like there's a conflict of like what Berserk is trying to be or say sometimes. The Golden Age had a point, and so he was able to keep it focused on that, and then everything else has been sort of nebulous, and it's a little hard to see that.
And you wanted to talk about Kentaro Miura's kind of evolution as an artist, and the fact that he's been doing this comic for 30 freaking years. And I think, that is a really good point there, that when people are working in a ridiculously long running format like manga, and it's kind of like American TV in the sense that your goal is to like not get cancelled. You want, in theory, for your comic to be one piece and run like literally forever, because that's how you make a good living doing it.
Right.
And certainly I've heard accounts from other artists in other comics and other media. My example is from Dragon Ball. In the Cell arc of Dragon Ball, there's like this weird escalation of villains where you start with robots, and then the robots get killed by other robots, and then the robots...
editors.
killed, the first robots get killed by a giant insect monster that then becomes the actual bad guy. And apparently the story there is that Akira Toriyama kept pitching bad guys and his editor kept saying, no, it sucks, do another one. But because it was happening in an ongoing publishing schedule, you got this weird curve. And I feel like, that if Kentaro Miura had a chart that laid out the entire thing, then you're probably right. Berserk will probably be a very different beast, because the Golden Age arc is clearly something that knows exactly where it's going and how it's going to get there.
Right.
And at the moment, it feels like everyone's in a holding pattern waiting for him to decide how he's going to resolve the final Guts Griffith fight and end everything.
It genuinely feels right now like an explicit, not safe for work shonen manga. Like, he's got his little party and they're all like, they love him, and like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, it's almost like he's in a training arc. They're on a boat for a really long time doing little like fun little adventures, but like, it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like there's, he's trying to like gather these new comrades and stuff, but like, these characters, like, they all have these different little lives. It doesn't feel like it's something boiling to this point, like in the Golden Age, where everything was leading to this this story. And like, it almost makes you wonder if it makes me wonder if he has these new characters just to like almost push product. It's like there's a little boy, and then there's a new fairy, and then it's just sort of like, I don't know. You wonder about the editors, like, you need to make Berserk not so depressing. So like, let's have more fun little pals to bond with. And
I mean, the kind of the central thing about the Golden Age arc was that it was this guy who has every reason not to trust anyone, and who's really only good at murder. I mean, he's the best at murder, but that's really the only thing he's good at. He's not good at any part of being a human. Kind of
not good at anything else.
Kind of learning to be a human and have friends. And that was really powerful. And that's what made the end, when all of that's taken away, because at the eclipse, every single one of the comrades, except for him and Casca, gets murdered by demons in the most awful way imaginable. That's what made it so powerful.
Yes. It really felt real. There was a real sense of genuine loss. One of my favorite pages, and I'll always probably love this page no matter what my feelings about Berserk end up being, where Guts is like sitting on that hill and there's all those blades of grass, and he's just like, it's just like that 2-page spread. It's like right before the Skull Knight like finds him and then whatever, but like, he's just like, he's realized that Casca's like, she's lost her mind and stuff, and he's just like grieving and running, and I think that's a really incredible scene. And one of the last truly important scenes in the story, I think, was that one, because I think that it feels, once again, the man pain is very well articulated there, but also just like that feeling of like there's nowhere to go and you just want to escape the pain inside of you, so you just end up running. It's really good. It's a very good moment, but
yeah, and it's sort of the last point at which it feels like the things that are happening are the result of decisions. In the Golden Age arc, they set up really early the kind of person that Griffith is. And so by the time that Griffith makes his final decision to transform himself into a demon, you kind of get it. Griffith did nothing wrong, which is another thing that people say on the internet, but you can see why that character makes that call. And all of the stuff that's happening currently is driven by this sort of fetch quest to get Casca's brain back.
I just don't think he knew how to outdo the eclipse. I mean, he set up this incredible conflict, and then it's just sort of like, how do you move from there? And like I don't think that he had an like the next idea. He had like routes that he could go, and he was just. It sort of feels like he's just been floundering in a way, like of potential things that could be kind of interesting, but like, how do you match that? Like, what do you do the resolution with that? And I don't know. I definitely to circle it around. I do empathize with like the storyteller struggle of like. I mean, I personally have mentally rewrote my own ways that I would conclude this, but like anyone can just have an idea of like how they'd finish the story, but it's just so different when you're the one actually like making it, and you're living with these characters.
and Berserk is incredibly popular, and being the head of something that gets that popular in Japan's fan culture seems to be a tricky thing to do.
Everyone's got their opinion. Mm-hmm. Everyone's got their opinion, and everyone's so excited, and there's so much like pressure on you, and like you it's so much weight on your shoulders. Like I do not even know the feeling that it must be to be that kind of artist that has that much people like waiting to want to see what you do. Because even with the degree that I have, which is so small, so minuscule, and like I have, I pace around and I feel a lot of weight over my choices and wanting to write the story the best that I can, and what the audience thinks and like what you want to say with it. And it's really difficult to kind of navigate these things that like, oh, I'll never get affected by that, but then you absolutely are affected by it. And that's why I do think that even though I am so critical over Berserk, I think that his dedication to like keep drawing his story at all is just like insane. Like I know how much 5 years feels because I've now lived that, and it's so like nuts to me that he's been doing that for 30 for the same thing. Like I don't know how that's possible at all. Like that, and not to mention like his pages are so detailed. Like that alone is just like, what the heck? I don't know what that's like, because I only like working maybe an hour or two on my pages, because then I'm just like, there's no more I can't even make this better than in that time frame. So there's a lot of other things on like what I think is like so incredible about his work, but also like I wonder about those different kinds of pressures that you put on yourself, and like how that could have over the decades crushed his sort of like direction or empathy for his own writing, or all sorts of things.
Not everyone can do a Hideaki Anno and just turn their creation into a commentary on the fans and yell at them for a while in a 2-hour movie. Like that's also a strange and dramatic burning of bridges that people don't have. I think we're very nearly out of time, but you did touch on the art, and we haven't really talked about it. And I guess that's the thing that I would really say is the recommendation here, is that it particularly the manga is just completely stunning, and not just the art, but the way the images are composed is just it's really special.
I think that some of the pages in Berserk are some of the best manga pages I've seen. And I don't think the whole thing is very well drawn. Like even though it's well drawn, like I can see when it's like not as up to the rest of the standard of the story. But like the pages that I talked about with him in the field is like, it'll literally live with me forever, because something about that image is so gorgeous. And there's tons of incredible pieces, and his character designs for all the demons and monsters are just like, they're fantastic. Like you can't deny that level of skill is truly unique for him. I always hold a lot of respect for him, but there's a lot of respect for him, but you wonder about like all the other things that go into a story. Anyway, trying to summarize my feelings.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good way to put it, and it's a great place to leave it. I think we are out of time now. Thank you very much for talking today.
Oh, thank you.
If people think that despite our many reservations that I hope we put across coherently, they want to actually check out Berserk, what would be your pitch for how to do that? Mine would probably be the 90s anime, because it's the best arc, and it's done quite concisely without too much faffing about.
Sometimes I love Berserk so much, and I wonder if it's just the soundtrack from that 90s anime, because, my God, it's still one of the soundtracks ever. But yeah, I would say the anime, then if you want to see more, then the manga, and I literally would not recommend the new movies because I don't like them that much, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's what I've heard.
Yeah.
Second question about pitches. If people do know about Berserk and they've enjoyed our conversation about it, is there anything else that you would pitch as like Berserk, but it's better in some ways, or something that scratches a similar Berserk itches?
Feeling. Yeah, I think that I recently read Vinland Saga a few years ago, and while that story is also ongoing, and it has some of the same issues. It kind of helped me kind of get over Berserk in some ways because of like closure through it.
Yeah. And final thing, I thoroughly recommend people check out your various comics. So plug your shit. Where can people find you?
Oh, yes. Feast for King is at feastforking.com. Nasty Red Dogs is at nastyreddogs.com. You can follow me at Cosmic Dream on Twitter, and then both of those also have Twitters at Feast for King and Nasty Red Dogs. And I'm also on Patreon, but yeah, you can find all of the comics there for free. Feast for King is 1,000 pages long, so there's quite a backlog, and Nasty Red Dogs is much shorter. But yeah, all for free. You can read all of them.
and I mean, there are a lot of pages of Feast for a King, but also Feast for a King moves along at a fair clip. A lot of those pages go by pretty quick. You're not reading panels and panels and panels of dense text a lot of the time. So if you want to get caught up, it's not actually unfeasible to do that.
Yeah, I think that most people finished it in like 2 or 3 days. So a couple of read-throughs. It's not super long, despite the page count. It goes pretty quickly. Yeah.
Excellent. Oh. Well, thank you very much for talking today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. It's like a dream come true, honestly, to get to talk about Berserk. So, yeah. A very impactful series, and I'm so happy to get this opportunity. Yeah.
You've been listening to Reserved Recommendations, a radio show and podcast from Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. The show is produced and presented by me, Hugh Dingwall, and I also composed our theme music. It's called Sack Jazz, and you can find it at wolfboy.bandcamp.com. You can find me on the internet at Objective Realty on Twitter, and you can find the show on Facebook under Reserved Recommendations. If you've got a reserved recommendation of your own, feel free to pitch it to me in either of those two places. And if you enjoyed the show, why not go ahead and recommend it to a friend? You can find past episodes at www.mpr.nz/show/reserved on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, Manawatu People's Radio is a non-profit radio station. If you enjoy this or any of their other fine audio programming, why not fling them a couple of dollars? Go to mpr.nz/donate for more information.